Well, my friends, here we are together one more time to discuss Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 1. You know, the one entitled The Next Generation. I know in my first video I did say I wasn't going to be going through a bunch of the Easter eggs and breaking those things down. However, it does appear that the end credit sequences in each episode are going to be chock full of information, details, possible spoilers about things that are coming up, just a bunch of pertinent information. So I wanted to go through a few of them and just kind of give my thoughts and see if any of you have any ideas on what some of this stuff might mean. Basically, the entire end credit sequence was set on consoles aboard a ship. Don't know if it's going to be the same going forward, but they were all filled with information. I believe it's called the Shrike. I know that's been all the marketing materials and stuff. Don't think it was actually said in the episode. We get to see the ship in some scans or something, and the information on the screen does not appear to be in English. I looked a little bit into it, trying to decide what kind of language this might be. Is it something we've seen in Star Trek before? Kind of looked vaguely Romulan, but I don't believe that's the case. The closest I could find is this. It actually looks Cardassian to me, just with a little twist. And that leads me into another analysis on this ship, which was not necessarily taken from Alpha Canon. It was taken from Star Trek Online. I do believe that this version of the Shrike here looks an awful lot like a version of a Breen ship that we saw in Star Trek Online. It doesn't look identical, but it looks very close. As we know, in DS9 during the Dominion War, Cardassia was on the side of the Dominion for a while, as well as the Breen. So could it be some sort of interrelationship between the Breen and the Cardassians, and that's why this is kind of a Cardassian-looking language that's mixed with a little Breen technology? The enemies in the first episode kind of had helmets, and some of them in the trailers with Amanda Plummer's character had helmets. Perhaps there is a Breen connection, some sort of loose alliance between other species, the Breen, the Cardassians. I'm not sure. Moving along into the next sequence of this end credit scene, we have what appears to be base pairs or DNA, whatever you want to call it. The G, the C, the T, the A, you know, the whole Gattaca thing. This seems like it could have a couple different meanings. I personally believe this has to do with whatever Beverly was doing with her son. Perhaps he is not 100% biologically created. That's for one. Maybe he's a clone. If he does truly turn out to be, let's say, a Jean-Luc son or a Jean-Luc clone, perhaps she was trying to do a little bit of genetic manipulation or look into his DNA to discover whether or not he has the genetic markers for the Irumodic syndrome that Picard got in All Good Things. I will touch on this a bit later because there is another reference later on in this end credit sequence that kind of confirms this. The very next thing we see is schematics of a cloaking device. Don't know how this ties in yet. Is this cloaking device being used by the Shrike? Is there a reason for this to be in the end credit sequence? Haven't really worked all that out. I did want to point it out because it does appear like it's going to be very, very important. The second piece I wanted to point out, this cloaking device does look marginally similar to the Genesis device from The Wrath of Khan. Obviously, this episode was playing up a lot of tropes. Carol and David Marcus. Was it a coincidence that they put that in there? I don't know. That remains to be seen, but I did want to point that out because it does seem like it's going to have significant importance later on. Moving on to the next thing I'd like to discuss, we see a holodeck programming screen where it says it's initiating the sequence of 10 forward LA version and the safeties are off. Why would they do this? Now, I guess this could be somewhere later on in the series. They visit the holodeck on the Titan or another ship and they program it to be the 10 forward bar for some reason. Or could this lead any credence to my theory that some of this is actually going on within a holodeck program? Click to see that video. But could this actually all be within a holographic program and whatever we're seeing here is the real world, the outside? Probably pretty far-fetched, but it does seem a little coincidental. And I will get back to touching on that a little later because there's another piece of evidence that I have that kind of fits that mold too. Coming immediately after the holographic 10 forward, we get what appears to be music. Now, I didn't figure this out, but a ton of people have gone on the record of saying that this is Pop Goes the Weasel. Obviously, that's a very significant song to Star Trek, even though I haven't necessarily seen many people discussing it. So I'm going to play you the clip of what I believe is important.
Marvelous.
I will also point out that prior to the season releasing, Terry Matalas said the very first interaction between Riker and Data was of utmost importance to what's happening this season, and this song is very much connected to that, so that's very intriguing. Speaking of that connection with Data and Riker and the holodeck, the very next scene we see in these end credits appears to be Positronic Matrix. Is this Data? Is this Lore? Is it B4? Is it Picard? Because technically he's in a robot body now, or a golem, or whatever you want to call it. Could this be something else? Could this be a grand plan that we don't know anything about yet? Let me know what you think this means down below, or is it just a fun reference to the fact that we will be getting androids later on? After this, we get what appears to be an on-screen image of the Titan A itself, and it has some sort of what appears to be damage to the saucer section. I don't believe this damage was incurred in this episode. So does that mean next episode the ship is going to be attacked and this section is taking damage? Is there something housed in this area that's of vital importance? Or could this be the section of the ship that 7 of 9 incapacitated so that Riker and Picard could make their daring escape? This could just be a simple fun thing for us to look at so we get an up-close shot of the layout of the ship, or it could actually have very, very important meaning going forward. Next, we go to another ship, and it has a bit of information about the past of it. I'm going to look at my screen here so I can read it. It is the war damage report for a Constellation-class ship, the USS Constance. It was status lost in action on stardate 44002.3. That brings us all the way back to that best of both worlds, the Battle of Wolf 359, the whole situation where Picard was Locutus. Obviously, that was referenced very heavily in this first episode because that's why this whole Myriad Codec was in play, the Hellfire, all of that stuff. Is there more of a situation going on, more of a link to the Battle of Wolf 359 than we're led to believe? Also, could this ship have any link to Captain Shaw? Could it have been a ship he served on? Could it have been a ship his family was on? Could this be the reason he has a distrust for not only 7 of 9 as an ex-Borg, but Jean-Luc as an ex-Borg, and potentially even Riker for being involved in that situation? That could lend a little bit of reason as to why he has such a distaste for all 3 of these characters. Or it could be completely unrelated or have some more significance. Maybe the ship wasn't lost, it was actually captured, and it will come back into play later on. Not sure how this is going to play out, but obviously this is being left here because it has some importance. Following along from that, we get a nice shot, or some schematics at least, of the fleet yard. That's where apparently Geordi is working, and it's where the Enterprise F is slated to be retired this season. That was spoiled in some earlier information on Instagram and through Trek logs and things like that. We will probably be visiting this place later on, and we get to see here what I believe indicates other ships within this fleet museum. We get to see the actual original Voyager, Janeway's Voyager from the Delta Quadrant. We get to see a couple of other ships, most notably the Enterprise A, the refit from the latter day original series movies, and the Excelsior, the one commanded by George Takei's Sulu. The last time we actually saw that in canon, technically, was the Voyager episode where we had flashbacks to it. I could be wrong there. Perhaps it appeared in one of the animated series. I don't think necessarily any of them are important ships for the series, but I could be wrong there. Also, one thing I would like to kind of just give a little thought to here. Are these ships capable of functioning once they're put in the Fleet Museum? That is to say, I have to imagine there's an invasion at some point. We've seen that before, where something gets close to Earth. There's not many ships in the area. Is it possible that while these ships are being housed in this Fleet Museum, that they're still operational and can be pulled out into service in an emergency situation? I think that would be kind of cool if there's an invasion force and suddenly they pull out all these historic ships to kind of save the day. Probably not something we'll actually get to see, but maybe we will actually, now that I'm saying that. Maybe that's actually coming to happen later on this season. Okay, there's a couple other things that I skipped over. There's a little bit of a personnel briefing on Captain Shaw. Didn't really give us too much information, but one thing I do want to say here, I believe this is related to the Rafi subplot that's going on, her handler. It says, do not seek blame, do not seek anger. There's a couple other things under it. I believe this has to do with the plot where the Federation embassy, or whatever it was called, was destroyed by the quantum tunneling device, and I believe this here, along with something else said in the episode, lends some information as to who her handler might be. As I said in my video, and as I'm going to say now, I think the information here is leading to the point that it's Worf. And I think the female computer voice was another layer of misdirect. That remains to be proven in the next few episodes, but I'm going to lay my cards on that. As I mentioned previously, I believe what destroyed that Federation embassy was the quantum tunneling device that was mentioned as being stolen earlier in the episode, and I think what we're seeing here is some sort of indication as to how it's supposed to work. This was used similar to the portal gun from the Portal series, or a portal from the MCU, something like that, where basically it's connecting 2 points in space and or time. So while this is clearly a gigantic weapon that has galaxy-wide impact, or perhaps even further than that, I understand the import in the storyline. However, looking at it through the frame of reference of possibly this entire thing taking place in the holodeck, or being connected to life trapped within a holodeck, could this be a way for holographic or digital life to kind of go through this quantum tunnel and come out the other end as fully formed matter to exist within the real world, so to speak? And then we come to the micro-neurographic scan. This has a couple of references to earlier Star Trek. I mentioned earlier that I believe the reason Beverly Crusher was scanning her son, at least genetically speaking, was to come up with whether or not he had the Irumodic syndrome that Picard has, if he is truly the son or clone or whatever of Jean-Luc Picard. If that's the case, the neurographic scan here means a little more, because this was used a couple of times in the very last episode, All Good Things of TNG. When Picard was bouncing back and forth through time, this is when Beverly used this scan to basically try and find out if he was telling the truth, if he had some temporal shenanigans going on.
I just finished the neurographic scan. Didn't find anything that would cause hallucinations or a psychogenic reaction.
Not only is this a callback to the original finale of TNG, it's also a possible another reference that indicates who the child might be. I would prefer it's a son as opposed to a clone, because I don't want them to go the whole Khan route. Seems like all modern Star Trek wants to bring in Khan. For the time being, I'm willing to accept wherever they go with this. And there you have it. That's pretty much all of the end credit sequences I wanted to discuss. There's clearly a lot more in there, and from what I understand from the people who have seen the entire series, once you watch it back, these will make a lot more sense, and you'll be like, whoa, how did I not notice that? Did you catch anything else in there? Do you think I'm way off base in a lot of my thoughts here? What did you think? How are you enjoying the show? Like, share, subscribe, do all those fun things, and until next time,
see you later.